NBC's Ali Vitale is reporting from Capitol Hill. Joining us on set, former Republican Congressman of Florida, David Jolly, and MSNBC political analyst, and Michael Hardaway, former communications director and spokesman for Congressman Hakeem Jeffries, former staffer for Senator Dick Durbin. Okay, Ali, what kind of support are you hearing, or lack thereof, for RFK Jr. in his meetings with senators this week?
Well, Senator Dick Durbin is right to lay out the stakes that way, especially when you're talking about the skepticism and outright concern that we have heard from senators on both sides of the aisle when it comes to RFK Jr.'s prior statements and work around vaccines and delegitimizing vaccines that have worked to help people and save lives over the last decades. Specifically, when you talk about the polio vaccine and comments that RFK Jr.'s lawyer and ally has made about that vaccine, that's something that senators on the Republican side of the aisle, including Senator Kennedy, who you were just talking about with Julie, said that they had concerns about. We heard from Senator Mitch McConnell, himself a survivor of childhood polio, talking about the efficacy of that vaccine and the need to not delegitimize things that help people live and have made people's lives better. That's just one of the issues, though, when you talk about RFK Jr., that he's having to grapple with here in his meetings with senators. It's also his past statements about abortion. He has had various positions on this issue, but many of those positions worry Republican senators who fear that he might not be as anti-abortion and anti-choice as they would like him to be. And so that's certainly one of the things that is also in the swirl here in the Senate that senators are grappling with. Republicans have various members of this cabinet. It's not just RFK, it's also Tulsi Gabbard, it's Pete Hegseth, who are controversial in their own ways. And now that we're getting to a point where all of these nominees are up here on Capitol Hill, not just one or two, it's, I think, a reminder for many reporters, many senators, many staffers, that this is not just one confirmation battle that is going to be difficult, thorny, and controversial. It's several of them, and it means that January is going to be a month of fireworks up here on Capitol Hill.
Oh, no doubt about that. So, David, let's talk a little bit about RFK Jr., because you do have, obviously, vaccines. You have abortion. You have his comments about fossil fuels and the pollution they cause, and that as a health issue as well. Some things that make folks on the right a little nervous. Could they stop the confirmation, or ultimately do you think that Donald Trump will get his way?
I'm afraid Donald Trump will get his way. I mean, I think what we saw during the Hegseth meetings on the Hill last week, particularly if you isolate Joni Ernst and see the way she started to come around a little bit, the pressure from MAGA campaign, conservative media, all of this is starting to feel a lot like the Kavanaugh hearings, where there are people with protestations publicly early on, but then they all come into the fold. I think the greatest concern about, particularly in the healthcare space, with RFK Jr. and other health leaders that Donald Trump has picked, is the abandonment of public health. I mean, the role of government in those positions is to attend to the public health, not necessarily your private health, but COVID's a perfect example. How do we balance the needs of society to stay healthy versus the individual freedom mantra that Republicans like to wrap themselves in? And then the societal costs that come from abandoning public health as well. The posture of RFK Jr. with the rallying of Donald Trump and MAGA behind him could be a very dangerous chapter.
And, Michael, as Trump's DNI pick meets with lawmakers, sources tell Reuters at least 8 Republicans are uncomfortable, with Tulsi Gabbard. We know she also met with one of the Democratic senators, John Fetterman. Take a listen.
Congresswoman, how was your meeting?
It was great. This has been a great opportunity to meet with both Democrat and Republican senators and address any questions or concerns that they have, and talk about the role.
Did he seem open to supporting you?
I'm not going to speak for Senator Fetterman or any senator.
Are you feeling confident that you are going to?
I look forward to meeting with senators as we continue through this process.
Okay, pretty much every pick and every meeting, it's great, right? It's always great. But having said that, there are folks who are saying this is different with her because it's not about a specific position she takes. There's a lot of reporting out there that she's gone into these meetings unprepared, can't answer questions. Is that a different thing in terms of how they vote?
It's a different thing because she both seems unprepared, but also we need to know the answer to one very basic question. What happened in Syria? That was a very weird situation that none of us really knows what happens. I knew her at the time, and I recall when she came back, it was just weird. She was different. Her staff didn't know where she was, and so...
What do you mean she was different?
I can't explain it, but she was far more quiet and reserved when she came back and serious.
So what did you think at the time, knowing her?
None of us had any idea. I had a friend in her office, and the friend ended up quitting because she had no idea what was happening. And I think her staff also had concerns in terms of they didn't know what was going on. I have no idea. I'm just saying that the FBI and others should be able to figure that out for us.
Yeah, and still, but if you listen to people who have met with her, they still don't know the answer to that.
I do. I served with her, and I was being courted by the same people asking me to go to Syria at the time. The issue was Democrats and Republicans had agreed on a certain foreign policy posture towards Assad. The Syrian Christian community in the United States was making the case that Assad was at least protecting Syrian Christians. Recall all of the ethnic civil war going on in Syria at the time. We were seeing heads on stakes.
Yeah.
And so the Syrian Christian community was working with Congress, individual members of Congress, very hard to say, we're not telling you what the answer is, but please understand that Assad's protecting the Syrian Christians. And if we see regime change, which was something that was being discussed at the time, Syrian Christians could get slaughtered. The question, though, comes down to Tulsi's judgment. Why did she then go? Many of us were offered the same opportunity and said no. She said yes. And I think what is at the root of the suspicion around Tulsi Gabbard is there's a lack of trust. Senators don't trust her judgment. They don't trust her answers. Can she overcome that? We'll see.
Do you know anything about what happened or what if there was a change in her might have happened when she was over there?
No, the issue was the meeting with Assad.
Yeah.
And that's where all members of Congress said, no, we're not doing that. She said, yes, we will do that. I think that speaks to her judgment, raises real questions in a confirmation hearing.
There's also a question of if one of these or more, I suppose you could say, but let's say one of these picks doesn't make it, who would they be replaced with? The Wall Street Journal reports, for example, that Tucker Carlson and Donald Trump Jr. led a campaign to prevent Mike Pompeo from becoming the next defense secretary. So it does raise the question, Michael, who would have Donald Trump's ear?
Yeah, and also let's not forget about the fact that the Trump operation isn't a traditional one. And so just because someone has a certain position doesn't mean they actually have the president's ear on that particular topic. For instance, Donald Jr. doesn't currently work for the transition, but he has a significant impact on decisions that are made there. And so that's another thing to consider when we figure out who's getting these roles in the cabinet, because the real question is who has the real influence there.